Welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Caleb Teske. It's good to be back here. I know it's been a while, but I had to dive back in. It's unfortunate that we have to come back in on this Forbins story here, but I thought it was important and it deserves some time. I do want to thank everybody who helped me re-up my StreamYard subscription. Garrett Mernick from I-89 here at Wolcott. Drew Greco from Green Star Growers out in Nevada. Thank you, Drew. Kevin Cleary from Farmhouse Cannabis, and Jordan Kagi from Verdigity Organics. Jordan, thank you guys, all you guys. I really appreciate it. And so what I'd like to do here, guys, I have the document from the CCB, and I wasn't sure how to do this, so I'm going to rip right through the whole thing. It's going to take a little while. I apologize for that, but I think it's important to go through this point by point. I will open it up for questions and comments. If you guys, as I'm reading through this, if you guys want to stop me and ask some questions or leave comments, I will try to get to them as I can. And other than that, I think we're just going to dive right in here, guys. Let me get my screen share out. This is the Forbins ruling document. Okay, here we go. So docket number CCB 2025-055. Boom, boom. Some of this I might gloss through as it's less important, but the first notice of violation was issued December 3rd. Response was on the 17th. The hearing was April 30th. And if you guys didn't watch the hearing, I did request from the CCB if they had that publicly anywhere, and they sent me an audio file that has allegedly the entire recording of whatever. It's like six or 7 hours long, but if that's something you guys are interested in, I do have access to that. Blah, blah, blah. The hearing went down. And so let's go through the findings of facts, guys. All right. I think we know the basics, right? Forbins is owned by Angela and Nick, Miranda Lozon and Alex Lozon. They've had a license since 2022. They also have a manufacturing license owned by Nick and Angela, and they are partnered with the dispensary as well. They also own this house out on Hallstrom Road in Northfield, where they don't live. They live in a separate place, but they own this house. And please, guys, I don't have my podcast gear set up, so I hope the sound is okay. If it's not okay, just let me know. But yeah, so for Chris Modica, one of the compliance agents, lives in Northfield. Before the CCB investigation began, she was apparently cruising around out there and ran into one of the Forbins employees at this address in Hallstrom Road and observed activities consistent with illicit cultivation. Chris informed her supervisor, Mike there, DiTommaso, and they concluded the activities were suspicious, but not enough to investigate at the time. Following her observations, the CCB received consistent anonymous complaints alleging Forbins operated an illicit grow at this address, among other misconduct. And Mike was persuaded that the multiple complaints and observations warranted an investigation. On October of last year, October 17th, Mike and Denise visited Forbins and Barry, interviewed Nick and Sam Austin. I think the stuff with Sam got dropped. I don't see it anywhere in here, but it seems like that's what happened. AV is good. Okay, thank you. I'm going to power through. So yeah, they interviewed Nick and Sam. Angela was not there. She was home recovering from surgery. Nick was interviewed in the office, and a recording of the interview has been admitted. I do not have these exhibits. I'm guessing they would be part of the public records since this resulted in a formal compliance action, but I do not have those. I think you could probably get them in a FOIA request, though, if you wanted to. Mike and Denise interviewed Nick. Angela was listening in from home, apparently. For the first part of the interview, Mike and Denise were unaware they were being monitored. As the interview progressed, Payette texted Nick to correct one of his answers, and then they realized she was listening in. When the interview concluded, 11:30, then they realized that this could provoke efforts to move evidence from this house in Hallstrom Road. So Chris Monica lived closest. She was asked to keep an eye on the place. She saw a truck pull up. She observed Scott Rod get out, go into the house, remove 8 cannabis plants, placing them in the back of the truck. We assign high credibility to her observations. She has decades of experience, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about her credentials. I think we all know those. Compliance Director Mike DiTommaso notified Northfield Police of the events. Brian Goslin from the Northfield Police went to the house, met Chris Monica that afternoon, confirmed that the truck was registered to Scott Rod, who didn't have a license, whatever. After seeing no activity for about 10 minutes, Goslin began knocking on the side door and basement door, no response. At the scene, Officer Goslin observed leaves with the characteristics of the cannabis plant on the tailgate and on the ground. More exhibits that I don't have, suggesting leaves were cultivated indoor and introduced to their locations close to the time of the photographs, blah, 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 because it was fall. So the other ones were fall colors. 13, sorry, my scroll is a little fast. Officer Goslin parked near the house, prepared to depart. As he did, about 1:30, the truck passed him at a high rate of speed. He followed him, pulled him over down the road. The driver introduced himself as Nick. Nick was driving with Scott. They have body cam footage of this. And again, I don't have that, but we could probably get it. Well, on Stony Brook Road, Nick offered to consent to a search of the truck. And Nick, don't ever do that, buddy. I love you, but don't ever give cops permission. I know you're nervous, but that's a big no-no in my opinion. Sorry. I'm going to try to keep my opinion out of here, but don't ever let cops search your vehicle. Never agree to that. Any good lawyer will tell you that. Asked the officer to follow him back to the Hallstrom Road house so he could drop off Scott. He made contradictory statements, at first flatly denying loading the plants in the bed of his truck. And then when Goslin asked if that meant there were no plants in the truck, he answered, "I'm not sure." Now sensing Goslin knew of the plants that needed explaining, Mattei told the cop that Scott does hemp breeding and that we still do hemp breeding at my house in West Hill over there, gesturing towards the Hallstrom Road house. Goslin informed him a CCB employee saw 8 plants go into the truck, provoking Mattei to stammer and back up slightly. They then traveled back to the house. Nick and the cop spoke more. They walked to a deck, sat down. Nick explained the story was a long one, described malicious conduct by the neighbor of an employee. As the two spoke, black smoke began emanating from the chimney. Goslin found the odor inconsistent with the usual smell of firewood. Mattei commented that his daughter just arrived and must have started a fire with wet wood. Further conversation with the cop was more relaxed, focused on the extortionate behavior between his employee's neighbor and a sequence of malicious complaints he felt provoked a CCB investigation. Mattei told the officer that his brother-in-law Scott leases the house, later contradicted himself, emphasized that Rod breeds hemp, and told Goslin hemp cultivation is completely unregulated. He explained that Scott must have come to clean out the house because Nick directed Angela to have Scott get all of his stuff out to better prepare for a walkthrough he wished to give the CCB. He reiterated there's no plants in this house, but when Goslin arrived, when he asked going through the house, Nick revoked his consent, saying he needed to speak first with his lawyer. Cop told Mattei he'd be turning the matter over to Division of Liquor Control, which is the CCB's law enforcement partner, and left the scene. And again, guys, if the cops roll up to your place, don't give them permission to search. This is just basic stuff. You make them get a fucking warrant. I don't care if you got a meth lab in there, especially if you got a meth lab in there. So vehicles continue to come and go through the late afternoon and early evening. Thick smoke with an odor consistent with that of cannabis emanated from the chimney. Monica eventually went home. When her spouse returned home that evening, he commented that somebody was burning a lot of cannabis nearby. In contra to the notice of violation, we do not find persuasive evidence to support allegations that Forbins' use of the spot and bury involved unpermitted cannabis handling. So that one was dropped. So these are the findings specific to the exhibits and the witnesses. Again, recording of the interview in October is Exhibit 4. That's the one with Nick. He explained that the house from Roadhouse has remained unfinished because him and Angela were preoccupied starting their business. He said the house was gutted, lacked a bathroom. We don't heat it. House from Road is listed on the Secretary of State page as LLC Sugarleaf, which was described as non-plant touching business created in order to receive commercial credit towards an expensive label printer that would not be extended to a cannabis establishment. Nick denied ever having employees at that house. Mike DiTommaso confronted Nick about allegations. There's an R&D cultivation lab at the place in Northfield. Nick acknowledged having genetics there before, and as Forbins came into the market, was said that was years ago and nothing was going on anymore. Asked specifically about the electric usage, he said there's nothing out of the normal. He said he did HVAC and construction, keeps tools there, as well as his brother-in-law's car. He said he goes to the property a couple times a month. Nick said he was targeted by disgruntled employees. He began to say a lawyer told him not to talk much beyond compliance stuff. And then about 10 minutes into the interview, he received a call from someone, followed by a text from Angela. Casually explained that Angela was offering additional information about the Sugarleaf LLC. She began to speak with him as though it was perfectly normal that she would be an unannounced participant in the conversation. As the interview continued, Nick was not forthcoming. He deflected questions by saying his lawyer advised against answering them, resisted answering questions directly about the observed conduct of Forbins employees. He was so reluctant to answer questions about the operation of the business that McCarty reminded him of his duty to cooperate with authorized investigations and even read out the administrative rules that require licensees and their agents to cooperate with investigations and penalize the provision of false information. Still, he deflected agents' questions by going on about his belief that he was being maliciously targeted. When discussing Northfield property, Mattei at one point seemed to acknowledge sampling out product grown there, but quickly corrected himself, said he misunderstood and clarified, we don't grow in Northfield. The only place we grow is here. Let me check. All right, no comments. Cool, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, by the way. Energy consumption, guy. Okay, so regulators and cultivators know indoor cultivation is highly energy intensive. We all know that. And cannabis plants thrive and produce only under intense artificial light, blah, blah, blah. Also requires near constant dehumidification. The phenomenon is so well known that CCB rules impose energy standards aimed at curbing the environmental impact of indoor cultivation, blah, blah, blah. Green Mountain Power invoices for their other house here, a house from Road, are Exhibit 10. The accuracy of their content is not disputed. The notice of violation served made clear that the board obtained a record showing extraordinary consumption, as would be expected of a location used for illicit cannabis cultivation. Respondent's response offered a partial explanation, denied as a purely subjective statement. The phrase extraordinary volume of electricity is subjective and inflammatory. When compared to previous years, electricity usage at House from Road has decreased significantly and maintained a consistent level for several years. Respondent has evidence which will support this statement. That evidence was never produced, and even if it were, it would have little exculpatory utility, as Nick and Angela have been open about using the site for illicit cultivation in the pre-licensure period. That practice would have been no less energy intensive then. Response also set out to explain the conspicuous consumption. The culprit was a heat pump. In italics here, I don't know if that's a direct quote or why they're using italics, or if that's just what they're. I'm not sure exactly what the use of italics, but it says there's an electric heat pump which keeps the plumbing from freezing and bursting in the winter. The heat pump can barely maintain a temperature of 50 in the property, uses an inordinate amount of electricity. It would not be sufficient to meet the minimum standards for habitability. It should be noted that the property also does not have a kitchen. Cool. Still no comments. All right. Well, 9 of you. not bad for jumping back in here. And please, guys, if you do have questions, I'm here for it. I don't know if I have answers, but I'll do my best. Before the response was filed, Nick explained to investigators his house was gutted, unoccupied, devoid of basic appliances, beneath standards of habitability, devoid of a kitchen, heated only as much as necessary to keep pipes from bursting. We find respondents' explanation of the house and road power consumption defy credulity. The board is asked to believe that an empty structure used for storage and barely heated in the winter consumed in service of keeping pipes from freezing as many as 5,000 to 7,000 kilowatt hours of power monthly. So it sounds like they just didn't believe that story, the CCB, that is. If a heat pump were the dominant source of energy demand at Halstrom Road, consumption would be expected to follow seasonal heating demand. Here, the bills show vast demand variation that is not explained by season. Recall that Mattei told D. Tommaso in his October interview, we don't heat it, quote unquote, and we, even more notably, when asked specifically about unusual energy consumption, there is nothing out of the normal. It is notable that Mattei gave simple and unequivocal answers about the house. Nobody lives there. It's unheated. Nothing grows there. There's nothing unusual about its power consumption, but changed tack and began equivocating about each point almost exactly when he learned the board had concrete usage data. Also inconsistent with respondents' explanation, few people anywhere would have less reason to run a conspicuously inefficient heat pump unnoticed and unremedied for months, if not years, than Mr. Mattei. He told investigators in the board several times he's an HVAC professional who stores his HVAC tools at Halstrom Road. His testimony that 4-digit power bills for his empty house went unnoticed for months or years because they were on auto pay is not credible. So again, it sounds like they're just not buying that story. In view of the robust collection of contradictions, obfuscations, and fabrications offered to explain away highly inculpatory circumstantial evidence, the preponderant evidence shows we find that the respondent misled the board about energy consumption, but once aware, the board obtained consumption data by subpoena, conjured a story to explain how an unoccupied house uses significantly more energy than occupied ones. The efficient explanation for energy use consistent with substantial indoor cannabis cultivation at property owned by licensed cannabis cultivators who acknowledge having cultivated illicit cannabis at the site before becoming licensed, whose cannabis establishment employee and former employee were at the residence repeatedly despite their denials, and where from cannabis plants were hurriedly and secretively removed just minutes after CCB agents confronted respondents' principals at their licensed facility miles away, is that respondent by its principals and agents cultivated illicit cannabis at this address in Northfield, a property of which its principals, being its owners, had actual and constructive control. We so find. So that's the first section there. Okay, we still got no comments. I'm going to just slog right through here, guys. I think moving a little quicker than I thought, so that's good. This is a section, Nick Mattei, 39. Nick Mattei was examined at the hearing, and I did watch as much of the hearing as I could. I think I got about halfway through it. It's really long, and these things are fucking boring as all hell to listen through. But again, if anyone's just jumping in, I do have the audio file, and I can send it to you if you're interested in, punishing yourself by listening through all that. So Nick was examined at the hearing. He said he received a call from Scott because Scott was inside the house and a police officer was knocking on the door. Nick told Scott to talk with the cops, but Scott would not, which I think is a good call, guys. Make them get a warrant. I can't repeat this enough. Nick alternatively told Scott, he alternatively said Scott grew hemp and had plants at the house, as he, like all of our employees, everyone that's worked for us, has grown cannabis. Nick acknowledged that the plants of this size observed by Chris take months to grow, but denied knowing of the plants or seeing them in his regular check-ins at the property. He acknowledged telling CCB investigators that there was no heat in the house, but he said he meant that there was a little heat to keep things from freezing. Nick was equivocal about what kind of plants he grew at the property. He acknowledged that Scott was not licensed to grow hemp. He testified he lived at Halstrom Road before obtaining licensure, and he was licensed to grow hemp there at the time. Though he was recorded telling the cop in October 2026. I think that's a typo. I think that was 2025. Once he knew plants had been seen moving, he still grows hemp and is perfectly legal at the hearing. Nick squarely denied growing hemp since 2022. Nick was confronted about the contradictory statements and concluded he probably misspoke and said some things based on assumptions. Asked on separate occasions during his testimony why he told investigators from the CCB there was nothing growing at the house when he was now testifying to knowing quite a bit about cannabis and hemp at the site. Nick said he thought he was answering as to things he grew for himself, so he didn't want to speculate about Scott's plants. That simply is not a reasonable or credible misunderstanding of that question. According to the CCB, Nick would not commit to whether he knew of Scott's plants or not. On balance, Nick's testimony was strikingly evasive. Over and over, direct contradictions were put down to misunderstanding. We do not find the witness credible. Nick, who in October said, we don't heat it to interviews, evolved to knowing about a heat pump that was heating the place. And then in his hearing testimony, raised for the first time his recollection that several space heaters were used in the winter. Nick acknowledged having grow equipment and lights at the Northfield property, but denied that it was used or installed. Nick explained that Scott had been a Forbins employee in the past with the title Director of Operations, said that Scott acted somewhat as his assistant and helped build out the facility. Nick described that he does all maintenance on the heat pump at Halstrom Road, agreed that 5,700 kilowatt hours monthly is based on the heat pump experience, a lot more than probably just the heat pump. He acknowledged the peculiarity of time of day usage evident in the property's power bills, with intensive use often coming between midnight and 8 in the morning, but he knew of no obvious explanation. And that's the section on Nick there. Okay, still no questions or comments. Cool. So let's chug through the Scott Rod part. Scott was called as a witness, and this part was kind of hard to hear. I don't know. When I signed back into the meeting, for some reason, the volume was super low, and I could barely make out what Scott was saying, so I couldn't really hear. I don't know if it's like that in the audio recording that the state sent me, but I got to check that out. So Scott was called as a witness, confirmed that he's related to Angela, Nick's brother-in-law, described himself as residing with Nick and Angela, said he splits time between their rental property and this place in Northfield. He confirmed he does not lease the property. There's little inside but a small sink, a toilet, and a small heating system to make sure the pipes don't freeze. But as far as livable, he continued that a wood stove was installed last fall, described himself as staying there in the winter of 24, 25, agreed that he had the heat running constantly, testified assertively that he grew cannabis at this place, including in October of, again, it says 2026, so it's got to be a typo again. Said he grew for medicinal use for a disabled brother, and that everything he grew there was for the brother. And 50, Scott answered leading questions assertively, but was halting when left to give narrative answers. He paused when asked by respondent's counsel how he found out about the investigators at Metro Way and Barry. He said he heard the word Halstrom, knew he had a personal grow over there, recalled we'd had some disgruntled employees in the past, and so figured it would just be easier to clean everything up and not have them involved, even though they weren't involved. Scott described cleaning up and putting leaves in a wood stove and starting a fire. Scott denied anyone asked him to go to the house there and said he did so spontaneously. He said he only had 6 plants and they were in the basement. He said he brought 6 or 7 bags and none of the cannabis plant was visible through them. Scott denied that Nick or Angela knew he was growing cannabis there, denied ever speaking with them about growing there. However, Mr. Mattei told Sergeant Gosselin on October 17th he was very much aware of Scott growing plants, though he said they were hemp. Scott clarified he'd been inside the Halstrom Road property while the officer knocked on the doors, but did not want to speak with him because he had been drinking. And I don't want to speak with them anyway, personally, but especially when I'm drinking. Scott said Nick came to get him to drive him home. He said him and Nick did not discuss anything at all about cannabis, and they were pulled over, whereafter they joined the cop back at the house. Scott said he knew Sergeant Gosselin was speaking with Nick on the deck, but had no idea or interest in what about. Scott testified he had been growing medical cannabis for his brother for 6 or 7 years, testified he worked for Forbins when they opened in May 2025. Scott confirmed that he's not a registered caregiver for medical patients, confirmed his brother is not a registered patient. When challenged to explain how agents could have observed him with 8 plants while he said he moved 6, Scott recalled that he chopped down 2 house plants. Scott testified that no plant material could be seen while he was carrying them to his truck. This is contradicted by both Monica's observations and testimony and by the clear presence of freshly fallen cannabis leaves in Sergeant Gosselin's photographs of the scene. I was also wondering if they had pictures somehow. Scott again insisted he was not directed to go to the house in Northfield. I heard the word Hallstrom. We find the explanation unconvincing. When questioned about his grow setup, Mr. Rod described a 4x4 table holding 6 plants, 2 mature, 4 immature, using a single light. He said there was an odor that permeated throughout the entire house. Said he had been growing for 7 years. He could not estimate, even when he invited to make a broad guess, how much cannabis a mature plant yields. He eventually agreed that less than a pound was about right. He said he really didn't remember the state of maturity of his plants. Mr. Rod agreed unequivocally that all the cannabis he said he grew over the 6 or 7 years, including any samples he received as an employee of Forbins, went to his brother. He said he stayed at Hallstrom Road 2 or 3 days a week and testified it was his practice to leave the heat on. The heat stayed on all the time, except for the summer, obviously. He explained that there would still be a significant power consumption in summer, too, because the heat pumps operate as dehumidifiers and air conditioners. Scott testified confidently he had mature and immature plants together on a single table under the same light on the same lighting schedule, and that he'd been doing about that for all 7 years he grew for his brother. I'm not very good at it. Scott said he kept the air conditioner going even when he was not at the house in the summer. Questioned by the respondent's attorney, Mr. Rod could not describe a mature cannabis plant. He said, I can't remember what would distinguish one. Mr. Rod denied that Nick ever gave him any help with his cultivation. And we find Scott Rod's testimony to be not credible. His essential factual contentions defy logic, contradict Forbin's own testimony, and seem highly implausible from every angle. He was visibly eager to offer irrational and contradictory actions on his part to explain away the most problematic evidence of respondents' violations. Consequently, between October and May, he transformed through the various accountings of witnesses from a relative who merely stored his vehicle at a vacant and unheated house to a possible dabbler in hemp, an occasional visitor to the Hallstrom Road, to a half-time resident of the place, inexplicably committed to cultivating medical cannabis there, despite his own testimony that he was terrible at it and despite manifest unfamiliarity with cannabis cultivation. By the end of the hearing, we had it that Hallstrom Road was unheated, but also Mr. Rod heated it aggressively, air conditioned it, and left climate controls running even when he left. And that's it for the findings. So now we're going to go into the conclusions. So here we go. The board is to assess whether the facts found substantiate the violations noticed. And I don't have the original notice of violation. I could probably dig that up, but I think most of what was alleged is covered here. So here we go. Quote, to the extent a person is contesting whether a violation occurred, the board may not find that a violation occurred unless such a finding is supported by a preponderance of evidence. And I want to stop and explain that to you guys for a second, because in a criminal court, the standard of proof is different, right? So if you're in a criminal court, you have beyond a reasonable doubt, right? That is, if you go to a trial, the prosecution would have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And here, when you're dealing with the CCB, you have what they call preponderance of the evidence. And the difference is a preponderance of the evidence basically means if a claim is more likely to be true than not true. So, you basically have to you have to convince more than half of them that what you're saying, they would think it to be true more likely than false. So it's slightly different, but that difference is very important. Because personally, I don't think this case would have gone anywhere in a criminal court. I think it would have been dropped because it is very circumstantial. However, by a preponderance of the evidence, very different set of standards. So yeah, the board's final decision may uphold its original notice of violation, may revise the penalty or penalties to be more or less severe, or may dismiss. 4 violations were noticed, each category 1, meaning anyone could justify exclusion of licensees and ID holders from the regulated market. The first notice violation, operating with quote unquote operating without all required permits, board approval, certificates, registrations, and/or licenses in contravention of CCB Rule 451, is substantiated by credible evidence and therefore upheld. Respondent, through its principals and agents, cultivated cannabis in one or more locations where it was not authorized to cultivate cannabis, and clearly in a volume exceeding any individual's personal use allowance. So that's the allegation, I think, about the illegal grow. The second notice violation, quote unquote, making an intentionally false statement to the board or a board designee, is substantiated by credible evidence and therefore upheld. Respondent, through its principals and agents, repeatedly misinformed CCB agents, among other things, about the uses of and contents of the Halstrom Roadhouse, where whether respondents' staff ever went there, whether plants were there at all, and whether the plants that variously were and were not there were hemp or cannabis. The third notice violation, quote unquote, intentionally destroying or concealing evidence of a violation in contravention of CCB Rule 451C, is substantiated by credible evidence and therefore upheld. Respondent, through its principals and agents, made removal and destruction of evidence its first order of business when it became aware of the board investigation into cultivation at the Halstrom Road property. The fourth notice violation, quote unquote, purchasing, manufacturing, selling, or otherwise utilizing cannabis or cannabis products from a source that is not a licensed cannabis establishment or dispensary in contravention of CCB Rule 451N, is not described by the facts found and therefore dismissed. It is reasonable to infer that cannabis cultivated at Halstrom Road went somewhere and was therefore utilized from an unlicensed source, but equity augurs from a different construction in the main 451N means inversion from outside our system, and that is not what happened in this case, except to the limited extent the first violation amply addresses. And here's the discussion section. I'll blast through this real quick as well. Okay, still no comments. This is, I guess, just like CCB notes. The advent of legalization and regulation called for legacy cultivators to make a difficult transition from underground operation, avoiding all government scrutiny, to intensively regulated operation attended to state-monitored standards-based production of a consumer food or controlled drug product. The days of clandestine grows and smuggling have given over to inspection, record keeping, lab testing, and product registration. A fair and functional cannabis licensing system cannot operate on a catch-me-if-you-can basis. The CCB has neither the authority nor the resources to play cops and robbers with its licensees. Instead, our system must operate by demanding mutual and voluntary trust, candor, transparency, and cooperation. When a mistake is made, whether in judgment or execution, an effective regulator will find out about it from the licensee that made it. And the regulator will have a strong incentive to reward candor about even a serious violation with a measured remedial response based on confidence it can have the truth about how things are going in the future. Conduct of this sort in this case is difficult for licensing authorities to address because it is incompatible with the trust that is prerequisite to rehabilitation. When the board had questions about an illicit grow site, respondent flatly denied any use of the site, knowing of any inhabitant at the site, any plants at the site, or irregular energy consumption at the site. That story became untenable because plants were directly observed by investigators. In response, the story evolved. Perhaps it was hemp belonging to a family member who maybe lives there from time to time after all. Next, that story became untenable because investigators retrieved records of extraordinary power consumption at the site. In response, the story evolved again. Perhaps the site was heated after all, in the least efficient manner imaginable, by a haywire heat pump owned by a heating and ventilation expert who is oblivious to bills. By the time the matter came on for a hearing, there was yet another new explanation. A family member who was not very good at cultivating cannabis and did not himself care for cannabis was using the site to cultivate medical cannabis for a theretofore unmentioned ill brother, and doing it very impressively by his own account for years, despite the brother not being on the medical cannabis registry, and even through his close family and sometime employer were among the most successful cannabis cultivators in the area, with better access to quality regulated cannabis than almost anyone in Vermont. Notably, the story offered to investigators and right through the hearing in this matter were unmentioned in Forbins' written response though procedural rules require the response must specifically identify each issue and fact in dispute and state the position of the person, the pertinent facts to be determined by the board, and the reasons supporting the person's position. Rule 49A, quote unquote. In the course of it all, it is not even seriously disputed that respondents' agents destroyed evidence. By their own incredible telling, they panicked, knew the board was suspicious of a site where they were committing no violation, rushed to the site to remove the evidence that would have exculpated them, thereby preventing the board from confirming their innocence, and then really felt it best not to answer any questions about the whole thing. Tolerating willful provision of false information and concealment of evidence is unfair to rule-abiding licensees, and it makes licensing regulation untenable. A licensee that will not be candid cannot be regulated, and a licensee that cannot be regulated cannot hold a license. This is a deeply unfortunate case that one hopes, if nothing else, may deter similar conduct from others. The board is not operating a criminal court, and its licensees are not operating criminal enterprises. The many talented cannabis entrepreneurs in Vermont should know that the board's first priorities are compliance and public protection. Punishment is not our brief. The appropriate response to regulatory scrutiny, even if there has been a mistake, is disclosure. Okay, let's see. There we go. South Florida, Sarah J, guys. All right, still no comments, so we're going to chug through to the Rule 4.7 factors. CCB Rule 4.7 provides that the board may consider specific aggravating and mitigating factors in determining how to address a violation. Following each by lettered subsection A through L, we find and consider A, respondent has an acceptable compliance history and is not a repeat violator. B, the violations are egregious from a health and safety perspective. Cannabis legalization and regulation is substantially justified by policymakers as a preferable alternative to prohibition because it allows production to occur above board where disputes are settled in the courts, funds are securely banked and duly taxed, and product quality is monitored and consistent. Illicit cultivation by a licensee is unfair to law-abiding competitors and it deeply undermines the health and safety goals of regulations. The cannabis grown at Howstrom Road went somewhere, and we do not know where. C, ordinarily we would consider whether a violation is ongoing or has stopped. Here, we don't know, and that may be a worse answer than ongoing. Respondent has misled regulators, refused to cooperate with basic inquiries, destroyed evidence, and thereby interfered with and frustrated fact-finding that would have enabled us to assess whether it can be rehabilitated. D, ordinarily we consider remedial measures taken by the licensee because our rules assume a cannabis licensee found plainly in violation eventually would acknowledge it, express interest in rebuilding trust by taking measures to avoid recidivism. In the 7 months since the notice of violation, this has not happened. E through F, we consider past compliance. We find an unremarkable and untroubled history consistent with A. G, we consider whether the violation was willful and deliberate. It was. H, we consider the circumstances surrounding the violation. This factor is a challenge. One area where we find the respondent's account incredible and consistent is that one or more disgruntled employees or job seekers lodged complaints of dubious veracity with the CCB for retaliatory reasons. Respondents felt targeted and it had a reason to. The problem is it was vulnerable to that sort of thing because of its own non-compliant conduct. We are persuaded that respondents stood as a true success story for the regulatory market, a local couple formerly involved with the legacy market, able through talent and hard work to build a highly successful and commercially respected brand, to create jobs, and to become a community fixture in Barrie. But the same above-board success makes the conduct here and the brazen denial of it so much more difficult to understand and therefore to correct and deter. As between aggravation and mitigation, we can't say the circumstances help or hurt, only that they are unfortunate. I, we consider the size of the license or operation. Forbins is larger, more professionalized, and more prosperous than the median cultivation license, but it is a local Vermont business built from humble beginnings. J, we consider the revenues of the licensee. Consistent with Angela Payet's testimony, they are vast. K, we consider self-reporting. There was none. L, we consider whether owners or managers are violators. They are. And here comes the order, guys. So this is the ruling. We've got through everything else. For the foregoing reasons, 1, respondent is assessed an administrative penalty of $60,000 to be paid within 90 days of this order. 2, respondent's license is suspended effective immediately to be revoked permanently effective November 15th, 2026, or at such earlier time as the board may direct. Suspension terminates all rights conferred by licensure, including the right to engage in cannabis commerce and lawfully to possess commercial quantities of cannabis and cannabis products. The identification cards of respondents' principals are inoperative for so long as license CLTV 0087, from which they derived, is suspended or revoked. The principals are to do no work towards any licensed cannabis activity for any licensed cannabis establishment, including other cannabis establishments in which they are principals or by which they are employed. Respondents' principals shall not apply for or receive any CCB identification card unless relieved of this restriction by further order of the board, and shall turn in through respondent's attorney those identification cards in their custody. 4, any other board licensee in which respondents' principals also are principals shall either cease operations while the prohibited principals remain affiliated, or shall supply the board a dissociation plan and schedule no later than May 21, 2026. So they got a tight timeline to do that, setting out in a manner acceptable to the board how authorized persons may carry on licensed activities. 5, respondents' licensed premises shall be kept under continuous video surveillance and all video files retained. No cannabis or cannabis products may enter or leave the premises except with express authorization of CCB agents and appropriate accounting and inventory tracking system. 6, if the respondent recommends an independent and disinterested person suited to hold a special permit pursuant to 7 VSA 886 in order to facilitate orderly cessation of its business and to avoid waste, it shall file a written proposal to that effect, including such person's CV with the executive director within 7 days of this order. Again, tight timelines for this. 7, during the period of suspension and after satisfaction of the administrative penalty, but not after revocation has occurred, the board in its sole discretion may consider modification of this order if the respondent should present a credible accounting of relevant events and a corrective action plan that, in the board's judgment, would enable the board to have confidence in the respondent's prospective candor and compliance. Okay. So let me get rid of, how do I stop sharing my screen? Oh, we could probably just close it, huh? There we go. All right. So there it is, guys. There is still an appeal coming. I have a lot of things to say about this, including some of the ways that the investigation was conducted. I had an issue with. I don't know what happened to Denise and all this. She seemed to be the one who kicked off this entire investigation, and then for some reason did not testify at the hearing. I thought that was odd. I also thought it was odd that they never interviewed Angela. You know, I'm not the best investigator in the world, but whenever she was named in the notice of violation, and the CCB never bothered to interview her, even though I guess she requested to be interviewed. So I find that a little odd. I find this punishment to be a little harsh, but you know how state agencies are, man. I can't really say much more than that. I want to wait till after the appeal is over before I really dig into all of my commentary about this. It's a very unfortunate situation. You guys know I've known Nick and Angela since high school, man. And you know, this is not what I want to be doing with my day today. This is an unfortunate story, but I mean, a lot of people hit me up asking to hear about it, and apparently a lot of people do not have access to this document. So I wanted to rip right through it for you. Yeah, so we'll see. There's definitely going to be an appeal here. It does sound like from that last paragraph that the CCB sort of left the door open. It sounds like the long and short of it is they didn't believe the story. And, you know, I'm not going to comment on that either. I haven't seen the entire testimony. I heard Nick's testimony, but I didn't get to see the rest of it. So I want to listen through all of that before I start running my mouth. But sounds like they didn't believe the story, and they have left the door open to potentially changing this order if whatever it said, if they offer a credible account of what happened. So, you know, if they legitimately did, hypothetically speaking, if they legitimately did not do any of this stuff, they're obviously not going to change their story. And if they did do it, then they're going to have to admit that they lied about the whole thing. And then that might be used against them too. So I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Certainly a big story in Vermont. This would be a huge hole in the market if all of their products were pulled from shelves. So that's about all I got, guys. I see there's 10 of you watching. If any of you have questions, I'm going to open up the floor here. If you guys got comments, I'm happy to post them up on the screen. I'm going to leave it for maybe a minute and see if anybody chimes in here. But after that, I'm going to sign it off and go think about this. I want to thank you guys for tuning in for sure. I appreciate that. It's been a while. I'm going to be back. Hopefully doing some interviews here soon. I was talking to Sarah Farnsworth about interviewing her about the Vermont Producers Joint and the co-op they're starting. And I got some other interviews that I've been keeping in my back pocket for a while. But yeah, I'm going to wait about a minute here, see if you got questions or comments. Remember, guys, don't buy weed from cops, of course. I got a new venue here. Tony Snow, sorry, bro, sucks. Yeah, man, it's an unfortunate situation all around. I'm gonna hold off on exactly why, but we'll see how they chop up the business. If they have to, it sounds like what's going to have to happen is Nick and Angela are going to have to divest. I don't know if that's the right word, but if they have a piece of the dispensary, because it was my understanding that this was only going to affect the cultivation license, and that they could still keep the manufacturing and the dispensary. The original notice of violation, I believe, said $60,000 fine and maybe an 18-month suspension of the license. And now it's saying it's going to be fully revoked. What's really behind it, you thinking? Honestly, Tony, I don't want to speculate. I do know that they've had some disgruntled employees for sure. And I do want to say really quick, the stuff about Sam, the kid who was fucking with Sam is out of his goddamn mind, and also got arrested for going over there and smashing the window out of her apartment and leaving them threatening notes. And that kid, Matt Lawton, if you're listening, you are way out of line, and that was totally uncalled for. And I've heard some other really disturbing stories about that. So, trying to extort people for medical bills, get the fuck out of here, kid. So Tony, I'm not going to speculate on that. You could ask Nick or Angela if you like. I don't know how Chris Monica ended up just cruising around out there and stumbled upon some suspicious activity. I don't know if I believe that story, but again, I don't know. So, could be true, could not be true. She seems pretty likable in the industry. Most of the people I've talked to, as far as compliance, have had good things to say about her. I don't know why she would make that up, but I wouldn't put it past anyone. Again, I don't know. I wasn't there. And aside from the fact that I do know there were a couple disgruntled employees, I'm not sure what else would be behind it. 14 guys, I see a few you just jumped in. If you got any questions or comments, now's the time. I'm going to get out of here in a minute, but I wanted to dump out this story. I'm sure it's going to be all over the news. Domestic disputes can burn down big barns. I don't think it was a domestic anything. I mean, if it was between Nick and Angela, that would be insane. It seems more likely a employee thing. I don't know if that's what you're saying is domestic, but domestic I count as like between partners or whatever, romantic partners, but for sure. Let's see. Good people grounds. What were the employees' complaints? Phone died. If you already mentioned it, I'll go back and listen. I don't think they mentioned that. I'm not sure if you could get that. I think you might be able to get some of that stuff in a FOIA request if you really tried. If you knew who the employees were anyway, you could FOIA that. I don't know if it was part of one of the exhibits. And I did mention there are some exhibits here that I don't have access to that were cited in this document. Those should be publicly available because, as the CCB told me when I was talking to them about the Holland thing, if it results in a formal enforcement action, everything should be available in a FOIA request. I'm not sure. You'd have to pinpoint. I mean, it might be an extensive FOIA request. Is if you don't know the exact employee, you would have to ask for everything about Forbins, and then that might be a very extensive volume of documents. You might have to pay a little money to get access to that. There might be some stuff redacted. The FOIA request is freedom of information, just isn't free all the time. Let's just say that. But yeah, I don't know the exact complaints. I do know they had some disgruntled employees though. Thanks for asking. All right, guys. Anybody else? I'll give it another 30 seconds here, and then I'm going to sign it off. And thank you again for watching. Let's see. Is the ownership of cultivation and retail the same structure? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. I would assume Nick and Angela have a piece of the dispensary, but please don't quote me on that because I don't know. I would assume they have a piece of the manufacturing and the grow and the dispensary. But, last time I knew Brandon was running the dispensary, so I'm not sure. So I would assume it's slightly different, at least in that sense, because I know Brandon. I think Brandon was managing the dispensary, so I would assume he had a little piece of it. But please, again, don't quote me on that. You'd have to ask Nick and Angela because I don't know all the details there. But it sounds like if they do have a piece of the dispensary or the manufacturing, that they're going to have to dissociate from that and leave it with somebody else in order for them to keep operating. That is my understanding so far. Yeah, unfortunate story today, guys. Not what I want to be talking about, but is the dispensary fucked? I don't think so. I think that, like it said in the last piece of this document, that if they have a plan to, let me pull it back up real quick. If they have a plan to dissociate, that I think any other board licensee in which respondents' principals are also principals shall either cease operation while the prohibited principals remain affiliated, or shall supply the board a dissociation plan and schedule no later than May 21st, setting out in a manner acceptable to the board how authorized persons may carry on licensed activities. So they've got 2 days to figure out how to a dissociation plan. And I've never heard that phrase before. I get the gist of it. Like they're going to have to take their names off the licenses, I assume. But I don't know the details of how that would go down, honestly. But it sounds like the dispensary, given if they can get on board with this dissociation plan, it sounds like the dispensary is going to be able to keep selling. And that's a good question, because I already had one grower hit me up and say, hey, that's a big store for us. That would be a major hit if we couldn't sell weed there anymore, and that would be, it's going to suck. There's going to be some collateral damage here, which, is very unfortunate for some of the other business owners involved in this situation, if you ask me. And, hopefully their employees are going to be able to keep working in other places. Hopefully they're not affected by this, because I assume, most of them had nothing to do with any of this. So hopefully I don't know. Sam told me that they were going to revoke her card permanently. I really hope that doesn't happen, man. Sam's a great chick, and this is like her dream job, and she works her ass off, and she really knows her shit. So I hope that doesn't happen to Sam, but if it does, that'd be extremely unfortunate. Keep up the good work. Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate you tuning in, even if it's late. This will be up on my YouTube channel soon. It'll be posted as soon as I end the stream here, and I'll post another link to it for anybody who might have just joined late or didn't catch any of this. But yeah, if there's no more questions from the 8 of you guys watching, I'm going to get out of here, I think. I forgot my tagline at the end. Yeah, looks like that's it. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Remember, guys, the devil's in the details, and the details are